I don't want to get lost in the weeds on that because I know that you're going to have the publication that's going to dive deep into this. But I feel like there's overlap in how you could approach this kind of material with names, the same way the undesigned coincidence conversations we've had about looking at other materials. I feel like it's a little different though, because the corpus we have in the New Testament, we'd have to find another corpus that has three other dependent, definitely two other dependent works on that earlier material that we can actually see and go, okay, hold on. This is a fair analogous situation in comparing Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, and then of course Acts and other material. In some way, would you say this work overlaps what we're trying to do by using other materials?
Yeah, like what's often the case is that there isn't enough comparison done on these kinds of hypotheses with other ancient texts, right? Like for example, Volcam, one of the other arguments that he makes in the book that has to do with personal names is that he notices that in Gospels, people are often given a personal name, even though it doesn't, like them being named in the text, doesn't serve any function. So normally, when you're writing a story and you have a character and you're deciding whether you are going to name the character or not, you give them a name if it helps the reader or the audience kind of orient themselves in the narrative, right? So if the person shows up often, you are more likely to name them because that's like useful for orientation, right? Like if you had a large number of characters who are doing things, interacting, but they are all unnamed, that would get confusing, right? But then you have texts like the Gospels where people often are named for no apparent reason. Like it doesn't serve any function. And this is true about Gospels and Acts, but it's much more rare in recognizable fictional ancient works. Like in novels, it's much less often the case that people are given a personal name for no obvious reason, where it doesn't like fulfill any function in the narrative. Where you do see people be given a personal name for no apparent reason are like historiographical works, right?
I need to start thinking about and cataloging what are some of the other quantitative things that apologists go out there and say. And it would be just great masters or PhD fodder just to try and even recreate the numbers that are used, just like these guys were doing. And
Yeah.
just the first step was, well, can we even recreate these numbers? And even there, like if it turns out you can't, well then apologists should stop doing it. We
Yeah.
still have apologists claiming that Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant. So are
Right.
the or so what
Well,
are we gonna
they
do?
were already claiming that in the fourth century.
Oh,
So what I wanted to say is like not enough comparisons are made with other ancient literature often, right? So why is it the case that in the Gospels you have so many people who are given personal name, even though it doesn't function, doesn't serve any function in the text?
I'm worried here that Camille is gonna tell us that this is evidence that the gospels are not fictional
I knew you were gonna I knew you were gonna say this. I
because
knew it.
now he's saying that in fiction, only in a real book do you randomly throw in the names of people that are inconsequential,
That's true. That is true. I think I love what he's doing and that he took the time to do this.
right?
Gosh. He also we've talked about this in private about potentially figuring out a way to put him a project together where he's going into other works that could be kinda going into the undesigned thing again, but we're dealing with clearly fiction and,
Right.
having a really good analysis that does this, that just breaks down over and over everything that keeps getting brought up by apologetics just gets toppled over when you scrutinize and critically analyze this stuff, so
The other chart I'm definitely going to dig into is that actually his chart of which books have been most cited, because that's
Can you hear me now?
interesting in and of its own.
yes, we
Yes,
can
we can
hear
hear
you.
you.
How is it?
Yeah, that's
Is it
uh,
Not as good, but
yeah,
deal with it.
we'll handle it.
Yeah. So what we were talking about, yeah. So undesigned coincidences, right? So here's the thing, right? So I would be able to write a book that would just basically get rid of the apologetic forever. I have the best research project for it that you can probably like think of, right? Because what you need to do is basically what we did with the names. You find some ancient works that are clearly fictional, and you just look for undesigned coincidences. So let's look at like mythographical literature, right? So literature that is basically about Greek and Roman myths. And you need to find texts that are reasonably long, so they have like comparable lengths to Gospels and Acts. They talk about the same events. So you can actually have these interlocking coincidences, right? And if they are like dependent, or the people who wrote them knew about each other, or they had some traditions and stuff like that, would be great. And it actually exists. And those texts are Greek plays, specifically tragedies, that deal with the same myths, like Electra or Oedipus, Antigone, and so on. Because in those cases, we have Euripides and Sophocles, or like Euripides and Aeschylus, talking more or less about the same events around the same time, around the same characters and stuff like that. So all I need to do is basically sit down, go through these texts, and find all of the different undesigned coincidences. And there's going to be a lot of them, like dozens. And the reason why there is going to be a lot of them is because the way how the methodology is set up by the DMA group is that every time you have some information that's found in one text, but not in the other, that comes like as an undesigned coincidence, right? There's going to be a lot of it in these tragedies because there is a lot of background knowledge that the authors assume the audience is going to have, and they don't have to explicitly spell it out. So they will make allusions to like, oh, this king ruled here, or this is like some different character did something else in a different myth and stuff like that. That's just going to create massive amounts of unnecessary coincidences if you apply the same methodology consistently. The only problem is that in the next like 5 years, I have zero time to work on this. So if someone wants to give me like $5,000, then I will just postpone my PhD for like a year or two, and I will just write a book. But
Let's start
unfortunately,
that GoFundMe, Derek.
I know. I thought about that too, but I also, I know a lot. Maybe we could put something together, but I also feel like it might be good that you get your PhD, get it over with, and then here you are, tackling. You can get
Oh, that's
endless
right.
projects. I mean, I
So
wouldn't.
2027 is the year where I already promised James Fodor that we are going to write a book about the resurrection together when we both have like PhDs, right? So I'm probably booked for more than 4 years now. So
all right. Well, so then if any other research students, PhD students are looking for a project,
yeah, I'm telling you, like my experience is if I postpone something long enough, someone else is going to look into it, right? So already Dr. Jeffrey Tripp reviewed the book, excellent stream, right? And also James McGrath is apparently working on infancy narratives of John the Baptist in the apocryphal works.
Mhm.
And he's using a framework which is pretty similar to Einstein coincidences. And what's really spicy about it is that, yeah, he's finding in these apocryphal works things that look like undesigned coincidences in Gospels, but of course he doesn't from that conclude that, oh, this must be historically reliable, right?
Right.
No, he just concludes what everyone else does. Maybe these things are interdependent. And that's why like one text mentions one detail, another text mentions a different detail. And if you put it together, you get like a more complete story. Just literary dependence or like shared traditions, people telling the same stories and so on.
Right.